due December 5th. It's due the same way that the draft version was due. So you post it, you submit it to turn it in, using the same password as the specific link to hand in the final version. And you also submit it to Blackboard as well. So all those procedures are on Blackboard. And I believe the EPA will send out a reminder that everyone has to do that. You should be well along in doing your revisions by now, based on the feedback you got. There are a couple of things, two minor things, I guess, that popped up. Well, one major thing. Make sure you're writing on the pre-modern era. We had a number of essays which addressed largely the modern era, and I was not much into the modern era, it's very briefly. If you write something that doesn't talk about pre-modern at all, it's actually a zero because it's not an essay that's part of pre-modern Asia. If you write a 20th century China, Korea, that's the wrong course, wrong business, the wrong course, I can give it a grade. So if you've done something like that, this is your chance to, I think I caught them all, but if I haven't, this is your chance to sort of try and rescue some of your grade by actually writing on the topic that's requested, which is pre-modern Asia. The other 2 points, one is a common piece of feedback I got from the PAs when I asked them about what they saw in the essays or the papers, with sometimes a lack of specific evidence to support the argument. So if you can, zero in on specific events or people, they don't have to be actual sort of quotations from a source, but even mentioning an event or a person or an institution or something specific in the history that we've learned to help support your argument. Would be good. Okay, those. And the final one is a sort of mechanical thing. It's using the Chicago Manual of Style citation form, which we talked about in tutorial, which has been posted as well. And some people use the parenthetical social sciences form, these one consistent form used by everyone. So if you use a different format for your citations, please make sure you use the Chicago Manual of Style form, which has been posted on Blackboard in the rest of the tutorial. Those will be all general comments I wanted to make for the essay, and now I'll turn to, I should call it the paper. Now I will turn to the exam. Okay. So, first and foremost, you probably know already, December 14th, sorry, the scary there, 9 to 11 a.m., and since we're a large course, they've broken it up into 3 separate locations. I looked this up at the official sort of web page. This is what they had. I suggest, though, that the night before the exam, you check it again. Sometimes they shift rooms around, but as of today, you go to these rooms depending on the initial letters in your surname. And you figure out where you're going to write these. It's a not an open book. No aids are allowed of any kind for the exam, and they'll be enforcing that and ask you to put your books in your bags and books and so forth in the designated area. So all you'll be allowed to have at the exam desk itself is something to write with. Eraser. And it will be, you'll be given 3 technical notes, and that's all you should need. There are 3 parts to the exam, and in order to facilitate our grading of it, and give you plenty of room, we're having a technical note per part. So please make sure you have 3 technical notes at the beginning of the exam. Make sure you number them, 1 of 3, 2 of 3, 3 of 3, and you put your name and student number and the course title, or the course setting of the EAS103 on the cover of all of those. And so these are the 3 parts. It's the same format as the midterm with an addition of 1 extra small statement. So the first part you read is the short answer question. I've given you 36 topics here. I will put actually 21 of those on the examination itself, we only have to 10. We're trying to make it a little bit easier. I don't know what the math is in terms of how many you have to study. Make sure you cover them all. But 21 of these will appear on the final examination, and you only have to identify and please make sure when you do that, you write down the topic in the text booklet so we know which one you're talking about, and then you have a separate sentence to identify it and a separate sentence to explain its significance. And by identify, this means, in terms of what it is, of course, if it's a person or a book or a place, you say what, who, what, or where, and when. And for when, you can give just a dynasty or a century, you don't have to have exact years. And then the significance is to explain its role in history. So there was a little bit of confusion sometimes in the midterm. People weren't clear about what the significance is. Significance is why is this important to talk about in the development of each age of history. So, for instance, if you have hiragana, you can identify it right, as a form of native Japanese writing that was developed during the Heian period. And then its significance is it allowed the explosion of Japanese literature, particularly national Japanese literature, during that period. And if you wanted to throw in the tale of Genji, you can also written in hiragana as well. But that would be sufficient to identify what it is, where it was, and what it was, when it was writing, when it was in Heian, and then the significance is it allowed the development of Japanese literature, national literature. So I think that's fairly straightforward. Shouldn't take you too long to do that part of the examination, and that's worth 10 points out of 35. The next one you'll be pleased to learn is an essay, and I'm telling you the general essay question. I'm not telling you exactly what it is, but I'm telling you enough that you know how to study for it. First of all, you'll notice that these 36 topics are all restricted. Most of them are all after the midterm. So I'm not testing the material before the midterm. I'm testing on early China. Yeah, I think they all are. So it's all on Japan, Korea, and later China. So none of the early China stuff is in there. So you're not having to go back and look at that stuff. But for the essay question, it's actually open in terms of possibilities like that. So, for the essay question, you will be asked to answer just one question. So there's not a choice, it's just one question. And it's a bit of a longer essay because I'm asking you to cover all three regions. So I'm giving you 700 words, which is roughly, and I say this roughly, 7 double-spaced pages. You shouldn't need more than one example, but to answer this. And it is an essay in 3 sentences. Paragraphs, not point form. Since you will be talking about Chinese, Korean, and Japanese history, we'll be using a lot of Chinese, Korean, and Japanese names and romanization. I don't expect you to be able to spell all those perfectly correctly. If you can approximate it, that's great. If you can't remember the name, you can describe who you mean, second emperor or so-and-so, then that's better than not writing anything at all. Do your best to come up with the names and terms that you need to make your essay. And it's not like the term paper in that I'm giving you some sort of statement that you have to take a position, agree or disagree with it. It's more a test of how you're able to go back over the information that was studied in this course and draw some patterns out of it, synthesize it, and summarize it. Of course, you do have to, I'm going to ask you to explain something, and so you're going to have to give me your explanation for that. And in giving me your explanation for that, I guess maybe explanation better, this would be better worded in your notes. In giving me your explanation, I want you to draw upon the knowledge from the course. So rather than just throwing you out into the whole sort of course and saying, I'm going to ask on something, on everything that we talked about this year so far, I'm giving you the general topic here. And this is a theme which has come up again and again in China, Japan, and Korea, and in all periods of Chinese Japanese and Korean history, is this relationship between the civil, Wen or Mun or Mun, and the martial, Wu or Wu, branches of Wu and Li in pre-modern Asia. So the topic will be on this. And it's actually going to be a two-part question on the civil versus So something about where they come from, how they're established, and so forth, and something about the relationship between students. So that's as much as I'll tell you now about that question. When you are gathering information about civil versus commercial, and I didn't give a particular lecture on civil versus commercial or philosophy of Asia, I touched upon it in several places in the lectures. That does not mean you have to restrict yourself just to the places where I mentioned it explicitly. You can use your textbook, you can use your source book to find other eras of history, other places in which civil and martial are important. Don't use history yourself if you want to talk about it. And you have to discuss all three regions. So when taking your notes for the exam and making your notes, your study notes, make sure you have something to talk about in reference to China, Japan, and Korea. And as well, if the era is completely open, so you don't have to pick a contemporaneous moment to talk about the same moment in China, Korea, and Japan, although you could if you wanted to. You're free to pick whatever era you think has the most information for you to talk about civil versus martial. And you might have more than one era, so you might have an idea about civil versus martial more in State China and in Song Dynasty China. Both of those can be sources of information when you answer this question. Just to give you some guidance in your study between now and 2014. How we evaluate your essay remains the same. 4 points for actually writing an essay, sentences, paragraphs, and so forth. And then 8 points for having an explanation, an answer to the question that's relevant to the question. And then 8 points for providing specific evidence or information that supports your explanation that you're giving in answer to the question. So is there or are there any questions on either part A, part 1, or part 2 examination? And then there's a personal statement worth 5 points, and this is not a mystery. I'm going to ask you to respond to this exact statement, so this appears on the examination. You can time to think about it. And what I'd like you to think about is explain how your perception of the pre-modern statement has been changed by the course. I didn't ask have they been changed, but hopefully they have. And I guess one answer could be I knew all this already, nothing's changed. But hopefully you have some change in your thought or new thoughts about pre-modern stage, and I want you to talk about those. And then I want you to relate them to, so that's one part there, explaining the changes in perception. And then the next part is as what you learn changed the way you view the nations of China, Korea, Japan in the modern world. So we're trying to relate some of this information to your experience with China, Korea, Japan, and the present. And I said you need to talk about the relationships with each other, with the rest of the world, not as isolated regions, but regions which are in contact with one another and the rest of the world. And you can be quite personal. I mean, you all have different relationships to East Asia or parts of East Asia, so you can bring that your relationship into that. So how you personally change your views, perhaps, or learn something new in your relationship with East Asia. And what we'll be looking for is not only an answer to these questions here, but a drawing point specifically from the course to support your observation. That's only worth 5 points. It shouldn't take you too long to pull that together. Something really from your own views and thoughts. So those are the 3 parts for the examination. It's only a 2-hour examination. Most of your time will spend obviously in the first 3 sections, probably quite a bit. We can, I think, tomorrow tutorial, the kids might talk a little bit about those questions. And we could address this one as well. I'll have to do a review about that today before we close tomorrow. Any questions on the examination format? All right. So let's look at our lecture today, the last lecture, which will be mostly on Joseph Korea. But then I want to talk about modernity in East Asia. And that's actually relevant to what I want to say first about Korean history. I made one of these charts for Chinese history and Japanese history, and now I have one Korean history as well. Another story, these are my sort of idiosyncratic charts that I come up with to organize these long stretches of history mentally for myself. We didn't spend too much time talking about old prehistory period. We sort of began talking about early sort of city-state homes in Korea. One of them, which was all continued to be called Joseon, and then Goryeo, and then the three kingdoms. And then finally, most of where we really picked up the history was in the three kingdoms period. And now we're coming into Shilla, Goryeo, as the final unified kingdom of Joseon. So this is a different era. Called the unified kingdom. We'll end here today, and then 105 next term we'll pick up with the encounter with the occupation period, the addition to the when I say encounter with modernity here, and I'll pick this up at the end of my lecture today, I don't want to make it sound like modernity is something that always comes from the outside, and the encounter with something that comes from the outside. Modernity is something also that develops internally in the country, and they're also in response to external pressures as well, and external models in the country. So that encounter is multi-layered, internal and external. When we're talking about Joseon, Korea, there's several sort of turning points that I'll highlight. Contact with the Ming, and sort of the implication of Neo-Confucian philosophy from the Ming, and then Sejong internally systematizing a lot of technology and knowledge, and laying down the foundation to support what is now considered a traditional Korean identity, is actually developed quite late in Joseon, and King Sejong as the key figures of that. And then these invasions, the Japanese invasion of Korea, followed by the American invasion of Korea, are often a kind of break point between what's called the early Joseon and the late Joseon. I keep on thinking, I feel like I'm saying good morning in Cantonese. I'm not saying it properly, probably in Korean. So forgive me. This is a map you've seen before, so moving from temporal to spatial here, in which the major significance is that Joseon is in a tributary status with the Ming Dynasty. So the Ming Dynasty considers Korea part of its empire at the time, but in a tributary status, it's not directly occupied by Chinese forces. It has a relationship with China in terms of paying tribute to China, but it's left as a kind of independent kingdom to run itself. So, you could put a physical border across here, but from the Ming point of view, it is part of the Ming Empire. And then, particularly, one last year. And it's at the end of the one last year, all that chaos, where one of the daimyo Hideyoshi emerges as a unifier of Japan, and he launches an attack in Korea. We'll get to. So the first thing you might want to notice about the Joseon dynasty is its longevity, officially from 1392 to 1910, so over 500 years in terms of continuity. So probably one of the longest lasting dynasties that I've done that in East Asia, but it's certainly up there with the longest lasting dynasty. But throughout it, there was often a pattern of struggle between the kings who sat on the throne and Confucian officials who held quite a bit of power during this time. And so I'll talk about how that pattern emerges shapes the history. Here's a map of Joseon, Korea. Modern day Seoul is where the capital of Joseon is well. It's sometimes called Hanseong, sometimes called Hanyang. In this region here. We'll briefly talk about its boundaries before we take a break. Here, I talked about the period of United Kingdoms, Shilla, Goryeo, and Joseon, and so I've given you a handy list of the three founding groups sort of figures behind these dynasties. And there's a bit of a pattern here, which is why I put all three of them up here. So with Kim Yushin, who founded Shila, and Wang Bo from Koryo, were both military figures from outside the court that control the court. Again, I guess talking about martial versus civil, who control the court and establish their own rules. And Itonge, who became King Seto, followed this pattern as well and founded the different dynasties. He was a famous soldier, military general, who's already famous for repelling raiders from China, the Red Turban rebels, who were taking over China at the time, tried to make incursions in Korea at the end of the Yuan dynasty. And he was able to repel them. And as well, he was active in repelling Japanese pirates who were constantly harassing the Korean folks. So he was a sort of major military figure. This is during the Koryo dynasty before Joseph. When the last Koryo king sent him on a mission, sent Itonge on a mission against the new Ming dynasty. This was in 1388. So he fought against rebels under the Yuan dynasty, fought against the Japanese, and now the Ming dynasty was trying to make incursions into Korea, and the king of Koryo sent Itonge against them. It was a suicide mission. The Ming had far superior forces. He knew he would die in a fruitless attempt to try and battle against the Triangle dynasty. So he left on the mission, and then he decided to come back with his army and take over Koryo instead, which he did. He occupied the Koryo capital. And initially he didn't have any ambition to become king himself. He had his own choice of who should be king, installed him as king. But in making this move against the Koryo, he actually was able to raise a lot of support among both the civil and the military branches of the Koryo government, who were not pleased with how the government was running things. And he had some key support from some major scholar officials when he made the move against the Koryo dynasty to establish his own Joseph. So I'll leave it there at 1:55. So let's come back at 2:05, and we'll talk about Joseph.